So what I'm talking about is what we call genetic genealogy. Now, you don't need a course in physics to pound a nail with a hammer, and you don't need a course in genetics to apply DNA to your family tree. You just need to understand a few basic facts about the different types of DNA and how they pass down the family tree. And we're going to cover those things in tonight's high-level overview. Now, okay, I got into this because, as Irene alluded to, DNA testing solved my personal mystery. 17 years ago, I was what I call an accidental pioneer. I was the first known case of an adoptee identifying my birth family through genetic genealogy. Well, my biological parents are shown here, and you may have read the book that I wrote, Finding Family, My Search for Roots and the Secrets in My DNA. So here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to start with the key things you can accomplish with genetic genealogy. I'll introduce you to 3 test types and 5 testing companies. We'll talk about how to order and collect your sample. Talk about sample results and key factors that impact those results. I'm going to do some testing company comparisons. I'm going to show you some examples of testing company tools, some more examples of what we call third-party tools by other companies, and then finally leave you with some educational resources. So whether you're a genealogist or an adoptee, the first function of genetic genealogy is to find previously unknown relatives. The testing company will compare your DNA with everyone else who has already taken the same test and will continue to compare you with new people who take the test for years to come. You will get a changing list of people who share significant amounts of DNA with you. And all but the most speculative matches must share a common ancestor somewhere in your family tree. Now, some of your matches will have online family trees, and you can also contact matches to begin a dialogue. And either way, you will learn something new about your family tree. The second function of genetic genealogy is to measure how much DNA 2 people have in common. The amount of shared DNA can be expressed in percentages or in a unit called centimorgans. Now, this can confirm or disprove a suspected relationship out to the second cousin level and sometimes farther. And obviously, this function is extremely critical for adoptees who believe they have found a close biological relative. But other questions can be answered as well. Are 2 people full siblings or half siblings? Are twins identical or fraternal? And is the man who raised me really my biological father? The third function is to learn what mix of ethnicities we inherited from our ancestors. Now, that science is new and evolving, and the accuracy of these ethnicity reports is improving over time, but they are still just estimates and should not be taken as scientific facts. They can help confirm known ethnic origins, and shared ethnicity results can sometimes provide additional clues about how you may be related to a given DNA match. One of my other presentations explores what really is a fascinating world of genetic ethnicity. The fourth function is determine your ancient ancestry through something called haplogroups in your direct paternal and maternal lines. And note that some of these tests offer optional reports on things like physical traits and genetic health, but that's outside the scope of genealogy, so it's not on my list. There are three major DNA test types: Y chromosome testing, mitochondrial DNA testing, and autosomal DNA testing, and I will describe each of them in a minute. Today, there are 5 major DNA testing companies, and I have listed them in the first column: Family Tree DNA, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Living DNA. The next 3 columns are the 3 test types. So, as you can see, Family Tree DNA offers all 3 test types, and their autosomal DNA test is called Family Finder. The other testing companies only do autosomal DNA testing. Well, let's start with the Y-DNA test. As you may remember from biology class, women receive one X chromosome from each parent, but men have an X chromosome they got from their mother and a Y chromosome they got from their father. Because of this direct inheritance path from father to son, testing a man's Y chromosome can trace paternal ancestry through a man's father's father's father, and so on. Unless there is an adoption or other name change, the surnames can remain unchanged down the direct paternal line for many generations. Now, women can use this test by testing a suitable male relative. That could be your brother, your father's brother, or a son of your father's brother. And by selecting suitable test subjects, we can explore many other paternal lines in our family trees. If 2 men each take a Y-DNA test and show up as a match, we know that their direct paternal lines must intersect in a single common male ancestor. In other words, if we go up one man's father's 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 line and the other man's father's 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 line, they must at some point include the same man. Now, the main limitation of Y-DNA testing is that it can't tell us with any certainty how far back that common ancestor lived. He could be just a few generations back, or he could have lived hundreds of years ago. Family tree DNA is the obvious choice for Y-DNA testing, and this test has different testing levels. You can start at one level and then upgrade later if you wish. Testing more markers does not generally produce more matches, but added markers can show you which matches are really the closest. And I offer another presentation that gets into much more detail, specifically on Y-DNA testing. We all inherit mitochondrial DNA from our mothers, but only women pass it on. And this test then can help you confirm maternal lines. In practice, it is more difficult to apply than Y-DNA testing, where the surname tends to remain the same. Your mother's surname at birth was different from yours, and her mother's surname at birth was something else, and so on. I describe these first 2 tests as narrow and deep. They are narrow because each traces just a single line in your family tree. And they are deep because the common ancestors that are responsible for these matches, they may be recent or they may have lived hundreds of years ago. Family Tree DNA is now the only major DNA testing company that offers mitochondrial DNA testing. In the old days, you ordered tests that only sampled parts of your mitochondrial DNA, but the cost of testing 100% of your mitochondrial DNA has dropped dramatically. So today, your only option is what they call the MT full sequence test, and it is the gold standard for mitochondrial DNA, and you can't do any better. Okay, unlike the first two test types that I described as narrow and deep, autosomal DNA testing is wide but shallow. It's wide because it can uncover cousins from any branch of your family tree. But it's shallow because it can only go back consistently about 5 to 7 generations. And that's because autosomal DNA is a mix inherited from both parents. So the amount of DNA from your ancestors gets cut in half after every generation. As a result, the DNA from more distant ancestors does not stand out. Now, autosomal DNA testing is the least expensive of the three test types and has the largest database of users. There are many companies offering autosomal DNA tests today, but experts only recommend these five, the five I talked about before. Family Finder, which is the name of the test at Family Tree DNA, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage DNA, and Living DNA. Any other autosomal DNA test is almost certainly a waste of your money. Well, no matter which test or company you choose, the process for testing your DNA is basically the same. You order the test online from the testing company's website using a credit or debit card. They mail you a test kit. You return your DNA sample by mail, and then they notify you by email when your results are ready. At that point, or anytime after, you can log into your private account with a password. And no reports are typically sent by postal mail. And that's because genetic genealogy is really not something where you just print out a report and file it away. It really is what I call an ongoing adventure, and there's much you can do with your results. So how do you provide a sample of your DNA? Well, standardized test kits let each lab run hundreds of samples at a time using barcodes and automated equipment. And that's really the secret to what has been a dramatic reduction in cost. Now, there are two sampling methods. You're either going to spit saliva into a tube or rub inside your cheeks with some little swabs. And you can see here which companies use which method. The method usually doesn't matter unless the subject cannot easily spit saliva into a tube. And here are 4 examples where cheek swabs then work better. The very young, the very old, anyone with xerostomia, which is dry mouth, and the recently deceased. And I'm serious about that last one. Many funeral directors will collect a sample for you if you have a swab test kit on hand. So what do you get from a genetic genealogy DNA test? Well, you can learn many things, but I'm going to start with what's most important. Using my Family Finder autosomal DNA test as an example, here's the key report you get from each test. It's a list of other users who share DNA with you. Now, I have covered the names for privacy. The default order lists them in descending order of how much DNA they share with you. And as you can see here, from the column called Relationship Range, the list includes a projection of how you may be related. And since different relationships, there are similar amounts of DNA, there is more than one possibility shown. Here I have assigned the correct relationship to the ones I know for sure. And you will get other reports too, but your list of genetic matches is the most important finding, and I will discuss some of the other findings later. For the autosomal DNA test, the amount of shared DNA is measured in a unit called centimorgans. And believe me, the scientific definition of a centimorgan would make your head swim. But all you have to remember is this: the more centimorgans you and a DNA match have in common, the more closely related you are. In my example, I share around 3,500 with my children, 1,500 to 2,000 with my half siblings, and even less with my first cousins. If your match has posted a family tree to the company's site, you can view it to look for common ancestors. In this example from Family Tree DNA, you can choose a family view or a pedigree view. Personally, I like the pedigree view because it shows the Y-DNA inheritance path along the top and the mitochondrial DNA inheritance path along the bottom. Now we'll discuss some key factors that will impact your results. And the first key factor is who is tested. Now, you can test anyone in your immediate family, but exactly who you test can sometimes make a difference. In most cases, you should test someone from the oldest generation available. Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA are subject to random mutations. Well, it's not likely. There could have been a mutation between you and your parent. So if they are available, test your father on Y-DNA and your mother on mitochondrial DNA. For autosomal DNA, testing your parents is even more useful. First of all, they are one generation closer to your ancestors, so they will pick up matches that you won't get. Plus, by testing them separately, you will know that your father's matches are related to you through his family, and your mother's matches are related to you through her family. When you test yourself, matches from both sides will be mixed together in one list. When two siblings do an autosomal test, they are often surprised to see, first of all, that some of their distant matches are different, and their ethnic ancestry results are often different. Well, here's why that happens. A child receives 50% of his mother's DNA, but which 50% gets passed on is random, and the next child will get a different mix. The same random inheritance occurs from the father's side, and as a result, one child may inherit a lot more or a lot less DNA from a particular branch of the family. The second key factor is ancestor geography. Where your ancestors lived in the world will affect your DNA test results. Well, first, let's discuss some facts. About 80% of the testers on these tests are Americans. The next biggest group is English-speaking people from Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. In some countries, DNA testing is illegal. In others, only medical professionals can order a test. The lowest participation is from Africa and Asia, and global availability varies considerably by company. Some of the companies will ship kits anywhere in the world, and others have a much more limited list of countries where they ship to. So after discussing those facts about ancestor geography, here's the impact of those facts. One important thing is that Americans with what we call deep colonial roots will see thousands of matches on autosomal DNA tests. Children of recent immigrants or foreign-born adoptees will get far fewer matches. Now, both groups probably have roughly the same number of cousins living somewhere in the world, but those Americans whose many branches of your family tree have been in the country since the 1600s or the 1700s, you're going to have a lot more cousins that are in the United States and be more likely to have taken one of these tests. Another factor is people from endogamous societies. Ashkenazi Jews are a primary example. They're going to see many matches, and the relationship projections are probably overstated. And that's because after marrying for thousands of years into a tight-knit small group, everybody's related to everybody. There's a lot of commonality in your ancestors. The bride and groom probably have ancestors, a lot of the same ancestors. So that's why that really messes that up, and it's a lot more challenging for them. The third key factor is luck. And with DNA testing, as with many things in life, luck can be a huge factor in how things turn out. For Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing, you may get lots of matches or very few. For example, I have 23 Y-DNA matches at 37 markers. My wife's brother has over 200 matches, and a cousin of my wife on her mother's side has 0 matches. When you start talking to people who have done autosomal testing, you will hear some wildly conflicting opinions. One person might say she had great success with one test and no luck at all with another one. And yet another person may report exactly the opposite experience. Well, here's one basic reason. If you pick just one test and most of your relatives happen to choose other tests, you won't see them as matches. Now, you can overcome this luck factor by getting into all the databases. And fortunately, that's a lot easier and less expensive than just a few years ago. I sometimes hear about adoptees finding a match to a parent, sibling, aunt, uncle, or first cousin. And this has become more common as the databases have gotten bigger. Yet the majority of matches anyone sees will be distant cousins. One of the biggest gripes you will hear from people doing genetic genealogy is that they try to contact matches and some of them simply will not reply. And this can happen for a variety of reasons. And once again, luck is a factor. Many of the people you match will be genealogists with extensive family trees, and often they will have information about certain ancestors that you lack. But many other people have been testing for ethnicity and genetic health reasons. They have never started a family tree, and they just won't be much help. And some of your matches will be adoptees. They can't help you, but maybe you can help them, and I encourage you to do so. You may be that person's only hope of identifying biological roots. Now I'm going to review some strengths and limitations of all 5 leading companies. Let's start with Family Tree DNA. As I mentioned up front in that table, they are the only company to offer every test type. Because they offer multiple test types, they will attempt to store samples for up to 25 years. That means if once you've tested with them, if on one test and you decide you want to, let's say, upgrade a Y-DNA test to more markers or do a different type of test, you don't have to send in another sample. They can just draw your sample out of the freezer and run tests on it and then put it back in the freezer. Now, another thing I like about family tree DNA is uniquely is that there your genetic matches are identified by name and email. Every other testing company has some type of an internal messaging system where you have to go through that to try to contact people. And that's often less productive. Family Tree DNA also sponsors about 10,000 free DNA projects, many of them as Y-DNA projects, but many other types as well. They do accept free uploads from other tests into Family Finder. And if you do that, you can pay an optional $19 fee, which then opens up all the tools for an upload. So your test is just like someone who paid for the test and submitted a sample. They won't have your sample in the freezer for other testing, but as far as getting in there, you can do it very cheaply. They include detailed segment data on autosomal DNA matches. Now, some limitations of family tree DNA is they have a small autosomal DNA database compared to some of the others. And in my opinion, their ethnicity report lacks a lot of specificity. It's not one of the best. Ancestry DNA, they have the largest autosomal DNA database by far. I think they're up somewhere, they're probably pushing 30 million, I think. I can't remember the last number, but that's a lot of people. Many of those matches will have trees posted on site. They have a tool called Throughline that will compare your family tree to the family trees of your matches and project how you might be related. They have a tool called Side View that does a couple of things. One is it will separate your matches by parent, and it will also separate your ethnicity by parent. Their ethnicity report is supplemented by something called genetic communities. We'll talk about a little later. Now, some of the limitations. Ancestry does not accept uploads from other tests, at least so far. There's some grumbling, or not grumbling, but there's some rumors that that could change. But as of right now, they do not. So, which means if you want to pay, if you want to play, you got to pay. You got to order the test. You got to submit your sample. They do not provide any kind of segment data on matches or a chromosome browser, something that more serious genetic genealogists have complained about for years, and it falls on deaf ears. They just won't do it. And because it is primarily a genealogical research site, they have a fairly expensive subscription that is required for their research features. Now, 23andMe has the second largest autosomal DNA database, and they have a very detailed and feature-rich ethnicity report. They also are one that happens to report something called Neanderthal ancestry. It's not going to help with your genealogy, but it's just kind of an interesting add-on. They also will check just enough Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA to report your haplogroups. Now, they do include segment data for those matches willing to share genomes. Now, some limitations there. They do not accept uploads from other tests like Ancestry. If you want to get in that database, you must order a test. You must provide a sample. Another thing they started doing, I don't know, a couple years back, is they capped the number of matches at 1,500. If you want to see more than that, you have to pay a $29 a year subscription that lifts that cap and provides some other health-related reports. I did that for the first year, and I saw I had about 5,000 matches, but I did not continue it. Personally, I've been quite happy with the first 1,500. They do give you the closest matches, so for me, that was sufficient. 23andMe has always been more focused on health than genealogy. Genealogy is a bit of the stepchild at that company. and they have no way you can upload a GEDCOM file to put your family tree on the site for comparison with others. Based in Israel, MyHeritage is the most popular DNA test in Europe and many other areas. And what this means is you may have a better chance of finding cousins who are still living in places where your ancestors came from. They have the third largest autosomal database overall. They do accept free uploads from other tests. In their case, the one-time unlock fee is $29, but that also gives you the ethnicity estimate that you would not get if you just did the free upload. They have a tool called Centimorgan Explainer, which adds some precision to the match estimates. They have a thing called Theory of Family Relativity. This tool will find possible paths to your common ancestors. Their ethnicity reports are supplemented by 2,100 genetic groups, and they have multiple family tree charts with and without color. Again, like Ancestry, they are a subscription service for genealogical records, and you need that for the additional research features. Living DNA. This British company was able to take advantage of a big DNA study by Oxford University called Peoples of the British Isles. And they have done their own sampling research on top of that. I think their biggest feature is that they can break down British ancestry into as many as 21 subregions. They're also the second test that will check enough Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA to report your haplogroups. Limitations, they have the smallest autosomal database of all, and they do not accept any GEDCOM file uploads. Now, each company provides some on-site tools that can help you go beyond the basic list of genetic matches. And I'm just going to show you a few of my favorites. Several of the autosomal tests do offer a chromosome browser, and this lets you see where you and a match share the same DNA segment on the same chromosome. And this example shows two of my paternal cousins on Family Finder. One of them is colored blue and the other is colored red. And I'm only showing 5 chromosomes to keep the visual readable. The 3 of us, as you can see, have significant overlaps on chromosomes 13 and 17. And those segments were passed down from the grandparents we have in common. Since Family Tree DNA is the one company that offers all test types and some different levels of Y-DNA testing, they have an advanced matches tool. Now, in this example, I have selected all the tests and looked to see if any of my matches on any test has the same surname as one of my maternal grandparents, and one of them does. You can also use it to find people who match you on more than one test, for example, on a Y-DNA test and Family Finder. One thing I've done for a long time is to get all of my close relatives into Family Finder. If they weren't tested directly, then I do a transfer. What you do then is you either import a family tree or you just build a small one on site that includes your tested relatives. And what happens is as you link more relatives, it will automatically sort more of your other matches into either paternal or maternal sides. Now I have over 6,000 matches, but by selecting one of these tabs, I can either focus on 3,400 matches that are clearly on my paternal side, or I can focus on 1,100 matches from my maternal side. Now, you might wonder, why do I have a lot more matches on my paternal side? Well, that goes back to that point I made about where your ancestors came from in the world. My paternal side has a lot of deep colonial ancestry. A lot of those people came over in the 1600s and the 1700s. On my mother's side, a lot more of them are more recent people coming in the 1800s or some maybe even in the 1900s. So I probably have just as many cousins somewhere in the world, but there are more American cousins on my father's side that are likely to be in this database. Now, more recently, Ancestry developed a process called side view, and this sorts your matches into paternal and maternal sides without testing any parent or needing a family tree. And this is really amazing. You can choose to look at just one side, or you can see all of your matches. And in any case, each match is identified as shown here. This is from first cousins that have tested on Ancestry. Again, the names are covered for privacy. Note, again, I said this is the biggest database, and I have 27,000 paternal matches and 11,000 maternal matches. And again, as I said in the last one, my paternal count is much bigger. A favorite tool on Ancestry is called through lines. While your genetic match list is based only on DNA, this tool looks at the posted family trees of you and your matches, and it identifies some common paper trail ancestors that could be responsible for your DNA match. Now, this is not proof, but these are clues and definitely worth checking out. Now, here you will see 3 of my genetic matches with the suggested paths to our common ancestor. Fanny McGinnis is my great-grandmother. My 2 matches at the left show paper trails to Fanny's brother George and would be third cousins to me. The match to the right is descended through Fanny's sister Bertha and would be third cousin once removed to me. And for each one, they do show how much DNA we share. Now, the same technology that sorts your matches into paternal sides and maternal sides also lets you see which ethnicities you inherited from each parent. And again, you can do this without testing the parents. And as you can see, my ethnicity is a broad mix of European ancestries on both sides. I do know that some of my father's ancestors came from Ireland. And when I select to view only Ireland, this confirms that my Irish ancestry did indeed come from my paternal side. Now, ethnicity reports are based only on DNA, and they reflect ancestry from maybe 500 years ago. DNA communities on Ancestry attempts to get closer, maybe into the last 200 years, and they do this by looking at places in the family trees of your matches. And they include me in 2 such communities. One of them is called Early Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and East Texas settlers. And indeed, many of my paternal ancestors lived in Alabama and then migrated to East Texas. As I said before, 23andMe will not let you import a family tree, but it will attempt to create one for you that includes some of your DNA matches. Now, they have nodes that represent the apparent structure of your tree in relation to these other people. And the nodes are unnamed, but you can edit the tree to add information and even correct any errors in linkage. It is an interesting feature, but I have not yet taken the time to do much with it. Now, here's the ethnicity report from my wife on 23andMe. I had her do 8 different ethnicity tests, and I compare those results in my ethnicity presentation. And she is a great subject for comparison because both of her paternal grandparents were born in Croatia. Her mother's known family tree is from France, Germany, and England. So all these areas appear prominently in her ethnicity report, and the Croatian ancestry is very close to the expected 50%. In Croatia, 23andMe breaks out my wife's ancestry into counties, and the top 3 counties are all along the Dalmatian coast where her ancestors lived. And I've added red dots to show the villages where her paternal grandfather and grandmother were born. This is the most specific ethnicity report that I've ever seen. MyHeritage has a tool called Theory of Family Relativity, which is similar in concept to Ancestry's through lines. It uses family trees and genealogical records to show one or more possible paths to common ancestors. Now, as with through lines, this is not proof, but you're getting important clues that I think can be correct much of the time. Now, in my case, my DNA match and I can both trace our ancestry to my 4th great-grandparents. Centimorgan Explainer is a new MyHeritage tool that uses the amount of shared DNA and your ages, if known, to kind of fine-tune their relationship projections and show a probability for each possible relationship. Now, CM stands for centimorgans, which is the unit for measuring shared DNA in an autosomal DNA test. One of the most popular techniques today is clustering, and you can do this manually or much more easily through a site called Genetic Affairs. Well, MyHeritage is the only testing company that has licensed this technology to use it directly from your account. The same list of your match names appears at the left and on top. The filled in squares indicate people who match each other as well as you. So people in each cluster are likely to all descend from a common ancestor. And the clusters are arranged by size, beginning with the upper left corner. They said Living DNA is a British company, and their unique strength is breaking down British ancestry into subregions. Here are the top regions for my wife. Her biggest category is East Anglia-related ancestry, which is marked on the map in blue. Haplogroups look at the ancient ancestry of your direct paternal and maternal lines. Now, both 23andMe and Living DNA will identify a man's paternal haplogroup and everyone's maternal haplogroup. Note that they do not use Y-DNA or mitochondrial DNA for matching. Matching on the autosomal DNA test is done from autosomal DNA alone. This is just an extra report. Here, the Living DNA test identifies my paternal haplogroup as RDF13. And it is very common in the British Isles. My maternal haplogroup is H5A7, and as you can see from the map, this is far less specific geographically. So here's my basic DNA testing strategy. Whether you're a genealogist or an adoptee, you need to get into all 5 of the autosomal DNA databases that provide matches. And you can save money by testing directly with the first 2 and getting into the others through free uploads. And if you're a male or have a suitable male for testing, also consider the Y-DNA test for tracing your direct paternal line. Now, you can use both of these tests as basically fishing expeditions just to see what you get. Now, mitochondrial DNA testing is, in my opinion, not ideal for fishing. Most of the matches will share common ancestors too far back to be identified. But it can be a great tool for confirming descent from a specific maternal ancestor if you can find the right subjects to test. Many brilliant programmers have developed tools outside the DNA testing companies that can extract even more information from your DNA test results. Some tools are on other websites, will require you to download your raw data from the testing company and upload it to their site, and many do not. Let's start with this very useful set of real-world data, the Shared Centimorgan Project. Since 2015, genetic genealogist Blaine Bettinger has been asking people to report how much DNA they shared with known relatives. And this table is now based on tens of thousands of reports, and it's been massaged with statistical techniques to remove the nonsensical outliers. Since this table is too big to see clearly, I'm just going to zoom in on the portion outlined in red. For any given relationship, this table shows the average amount of DNA shared and the range of findings. For example, a biological aunt or uncle of yours would, on average, share 1,750 centimorgans, but people have reported shared amounts as low as 1,349 and as high as 2,175. As you review this table, you will see that a given amount of shared DNA could result from several different relationships. Now, in my case, I found 4 half-siblings. But based on the DNA we shared, each could have been a grandparent, grandchild, aunt, uncle, or niece, nephew. For closer relatives, only one of those relationships will usually make sense, just due to age and other known facts about the family trees involved. For more distant relationships, it can be much less obvious. The people at DNA Painter have combined this data with other research to create a handy interactive tool. Let's say you share 700 centimorgans with someone. You enter 700 into the tool, and it will show you the probabilities of various relationships. In this case, it's about 70% likely to be a first cousin and 30% likely to be a first cousin once removed. But note that there are multiple less common relationships in each group, including various half relationships, which really can muddy the waters. GEDmatch is the granddaddy of third-party DNA tools, and you can upload your raw DNA data and uncover matches with people who did a different test. You can also upload a GEDCOM file of your family tree and automatically compare it to those of others. The site has many free tools for analyzing your data and some additional tools that do require a subscription. Now, there are and there have been other companies doing Y-DNA testing, and some that used to do mitochondrial DNA testing. Now, this volunteer-run nonprofit called Mito Y-DNA lets anyone upload such data for comparison with others, and it also provides some interesting tools for looking at your haplogroups. Here's just one interesting feature of the Mito Y-DNA site. It picked up my terminal SNP of A545 from my Big Y700 data and plotted the migration path of my direct paternal line all the way from Africa to England over various color-coded eras. And they say A545 branched off in medieval times. Well, that would be in the 1500s or earlier. While this may not be a big help yet genealogically, the explosion of newly discovered SNPs will keep defining more recent branches. Here's an example of an advanced topic. Using tools like DNA Painter, people are looking at specific chromosomes and identifying which segments passed down from which ancestors. Another great tool at DNA Painter is WATO, which stands for What Are the Odds? WATO is designed to help you figure out where someone might fit into a known family tree by using the amount of DNA they share with people in that tree. Well, long after I had identified my birth father, a surprise first cousin match showed up on one of my DNA tests with no idea how we were related. She also matched several relatives on my paternal side. As a first cousin DNA match, she had to be the child of one of my 4 deceased uncles. And this tool showed me which one it was. And I do share the step-by-step details in another presentation on finding family. I mentioned earlier that MyHeritage had licensed the auto-cluster tool from Genetic Affairs, and that company has developed many additional tools to make genetic genealogy more productive. So once you've got DNA results and a family tree to work with, you may want to check out some of the tools on their website. And you can do some things for free and others require a subscription. Well, DNA testing for genealogy is mostly an online experience. And fortunately, the internet is also a great place to learn about these tests and how to use them. So here is the path I recommend to learn more. For a basic, easy to understand grounding in DNA testing, start with my website, dnafavorites.com. Here you can see the menu of pages in red. And starting near the top and moving down from one page to the next, it just provides a great overview of genetic genealogy today. But along the way, you'll find more than 150 links that can take you directly to the most useful DNA testing resources. Again, that site is dnafavorites.com. The DNA testing companies all have educational resources for their users. Family Tree DNA has some of the best in its learning center. And here, for example, are the links offered in the section on standard Y-DNA testing. By visiting their site, you can click on any link to learn more. The most comprehensive online resource for genetic genealogy is the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. In particular, they have a great wiki that you can browse or search for specific subjects. And the site is isog.org. It's not a .com, it's a .org. And speaking of wikis, MyHeritage has created a community-led online encyclopedia for genealogy and DNA. And so far, I have authored 3 of the topics in the DNA section. What I shared tonight about my personal journey is just a tiny part of my decades-long search for roots. And the full story is in my award-winning book, Finding Family, My Search for Roots and the Secrets in My DNA. The book does include a beginner's guide to DNA testing as an appendix, and it is available in print, ebook, and audiobook formats at Amazon and Audible. Fortunately, my book has been extremely well received by both everyday readers and professional book reviewers. And I'm sharing one professional review here, plus a summary of more than 800 ratings on Amazon. Well, in addition to my DNA Favorites website, I have a DNA Favorites Facebook page, and also look for the name Richard Hill DNA on Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you belong to any other group that would enjoy learning more about DNA testing through either a virtual or in-person presentation, you can contact me through my email, which is richardhilldna@gmail.com. Now, this concludes my presentation, and I'm going to answer any questions you have about this presentation or DNA in general. Now, let me stop sharing, and we'll get back to that. You will have access to this presentation recording, so you can go back and watch it again, pause it, take notes. You do need to kind of get into the computer world in the sense of getting your own family tree information on some kind of a program. And Family Tree Maker is one I use too. And it is nice because it does integrate with the ancestry database. You can have your same family tree on Ancestry and on Family Tree Maker, and you make a change one place and it'll be reflected in the other. There are many family tree programs available. I happened to get into Family Tree Maker first when I got into genealogy, and so I did not do a review of all the ones out there and do a comparison. It's just one I heard about and I got it, and I've been very happy with it. Again, one of the big reasons is the integration with Ancestry, because they do at least the better ones, and I would call both 23andMe and Ancestry that probably the two best for ethnicity reports, and they will break out African American ancestry into different countries in Africa. So that's very enlightening for people with that kind of ancestry. But another interesting thing on the same subject is that, and I think Dr. Henry Louis Gates has told this. I've seen him a couple of times at conferences where he spoke, and I remember him saying, at least at the time, that he had never tested a person, an African American, that did not have some European ancestry, and most of that is from the era of slavery, where you go back many generations. Somewhere along the line, there was some European ancestry that got into the family tree one way or another, and that was kind of one of the side effects of slavery, I guess. The companies have collected reference samples from different countries. And once you get those reference samples, then they can kind of see a difference between, I can't think what, I can't even think of some of the different African countries there, but all those African countries along the west coast of Africa there, they can see differences. And so they can take a person of African ancestry and start breaking that down into groups. Let's say somebody that you is a distant cousin. Say they're a third cousin, but they don't show up as you both test in the same test, and you don't show up as a match. The reason for that is because of the randomness involved. Anything beyond second cousin, you may not show up as a match, because it just happens that you got different parts of, you have some great grandparents that in common, but as it filtered down through the generations, you ended up with significantly different parts of their DNA. And as a result, you just don't show up as a match. And I don't remember the exact numbers anymore, but it's something like at the third cousin level, and don't quote me on this because these are just rough numbers of what I'm remembering. Something like, let's say 10% of your third cousins will not show up as a match. But it becomes like 30% of your fourth cousins won't show up as a match. And then maybe 50% of your fifth cousins won't show up as a match. Okay. You still get a lot of matches because you have so many fifth cousins, but some of them just will not show up. That's something to keep in mind.
Richard, the biggest thanks is to you.